How the dice fell. Flint Daniels and the Trees of Knowledge. Part 5.
So yeah, we didn't play for 2 years and then we TPK'd. The end.
Yeah, that was quick. So yeah, I mean, when we had left off, so when we left off 2 years ago, we're on the ship, not a spaceship, but like a sea ship, and it's full of the mind snakes, and we don't know who's infected, who's not, or if anyone's infected. Pill has a scanner that can scan whether people are infected. However, it's not 100% clear that it works on anything but the aliens who live on this planet. So, but they think it should work. So, but so it says everyone is uninfected, and but there was an incident where like mind snakes just went rampant throughout the ship, and infected have clearly taken over the bridge because the ship is heading back towards land, back towards civilization, back towards capture. And they want it to go out into the deep ocean where the mother baobab is to infect it with a cognito hazard image from Flint Daniels' mind. It's just such a great series of statements that are
it all
true.
makes sense in perfectly sensical in context. Yep. Back from the episode Flint Daniels and the Insanity Machine. Flint Daniels looked deep into the insanity machine, and he still has the images he saw there in his mind. And if we put that in the baobab, mother baobab, that will solve everything. Well, no, half the people on this planet will die, but that's still better than the alternative.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative is they all die. So.
Yeah. We got one of those trolley problems ahead, and we're just pushing the button that kills people. So awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, the plan is it will stun the baobabs, and the plan is it will it basically will essentially stun and kill the baobab network, and so then all the people who have mind snakes in them will fall unconscious, and at that point they can successfully remove those snakes. But then it becomes a race to perform surgery on a planet full of unconscious people before they die of starvation, or probably not starvation, the water version of starvation, thirst. So yeah. But if they don't do it, the whole planet's going to blow up in like a month or less. So
an indeterminate period of time.
Yeah. So when last we left off, they had just unlocked the bridge, and the doors had opened, the smoke comes pouring out, and a million lasers all start firing at them. And that's where we picked back up. Yeah, it was a tactically challenging situation for our heroes. And
I think John may have misjudged how difficult a combat that was.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing he did as the first round was progressing was take half the baddies off the map because there were too many baddies.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different things that went sort of wrong with this combat. So one is the players were really rusty, and well, I was rusty, but I mean, their performance is what matters.
Yeah.
So the players are rusty. Two, I hadn't played this in a long time, and I had forgotten like the right levels of balance with enemies, and so I put way too many enemies in there. And three, it was a very tactically challenging situation for the party, and that enhanced the difficulty. And then especially combined with their rustiness, because they didn't like quickly get out of the tactically inferior situation either. So it all kind of compounded to make it like, the door opened and they all just bottlenecked through this tiny doorway into a million laser guns and just got like all completely gunned down.
Now, to be also fair to us, the way combat works in Space Alert is you can't necessarily move on your first turn.
Yeah,
You draw
true.
random action cards, and you can only do what the action cards allow you to do. And so some of us didn't even have movement action cards. And so we had no choice but to just, basically step into the kill zone and then just stand there.
Now, even then, actually, I think things would have. I think it still would have been too hard, but they would have gone significantly better if it wasn't for the taser incident.
Yes,
Which
the
is like a classic
incident.
Space Alert thing. I mean, these rules are meant to replicate the feel of the Space Alert board game, and that certainly did because
Mhm.
so they had picked up these tasers that were developed against the Mind Snakes, and the tasers, all they do is stun normal enemies, so they're not good at doing damage, but they kill Mind Snakes in any zone or adjacent zone, so it's super good. But stunning enemies is only so-so. I mean, it can be useful if they're about to do something nasty, um, but just the way things work is like you play your cards, and first the movement happens, and then the actions go off in order around the table. And they just weren't connecting, they didn't communicate, and also they didn't exactly remember that per se. And what happened was everyone except for Dr. Yoon stepped into the same zone on the very turn that Dr. Yoon tased that zone. And so that stunned the entire party except for Dr. Yoon, right in the middle of all the enemies where they could all shoot them. The entire room could be shooting them, and they were all just standing there stunned for an entire round. It was really quite brutal.
Yep.
Yeah. So it became clear that this was going to be a TPK right away, and that was actually okay because I had a plan for a TPK, but it also would have been like super unsatisfying.
Mhm.
And Brian and I had been chatting about like ideas for tweaking the combat system for a while to make things more like pulpy, where as you get more hurt, you get more awesome, kind of thing, like how people that's how things always work, right? And so I decided, well, I wasn't planning to bring this rule out right now because I didn't want to change a million things, but maybe this is the time. That rule is basically previously when it would just be you go down, and then at the end of the combat you wake up with a minor consequence. Instead, you can choose to go down for free, or you can just stay standing and take a minor consequence at the end of the combat, and then that can upgrade to a major and upgrade to a grave, and the next one is you die. So you can basically go down. You can get into the situation where you go down like 3 times. It's just you get these nasty consequences. And I decided to roll with that just to try it out, because otherwise this was going to be a very short and unsatisfying combat. And I mean, just to talk about that for a minute, I actually, at the end of this, I decided, and I think that everyone was kind of in agreement, that this rule actually wasn't very good. It made the combat way too long, way too easy, and then at the end, everyone ended up with grave consequences. So basically, it made the combat really long, really easy, and then everyone was just destroyed after. It's not a good rule. I'm scrapping that idea. We're not going to use it again. But we used it for this combat, so that's how it went. Anyway, so that's how they survived massive gunfire, because in that first round, by the time they were done being stunned, Chumley, the security officer, had gone down, and I think
Hill was fine.
Flint Daniels had gone down, but with that alternate rule, instead they just had basically accepted one consequence at the end of the combat, kind of thing, and just keep going.
I mean, if it hadn't been for that rule, I think that Pill would have just turned around and run away, which could have led to a more complicated situation. But
that actually might have been interesting. It might have worked. Well, depending on whether Pill would be interested in rescuing the party, that might have worked well with my TPK plan. So,
well, I had been previously advocating letting the planet explode, so maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I had in mind this whole thing is like my hope is that the heroes get through this whole adventure and succeed, but I've always had it's actually pretty challenging. Like I'm going to throw some pretty challenging stuff, and I always had like, okay, well, what if they fail? Because it's a
Yeah.
distinct possibility. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
they
Pill was doing all right in the combat until about halfway through, where I took a move action to get out of a square with a bunch of enemies in it. And I wound up standing basically, we were on the ship's bridge essentially. And it had a lot of like, platforms and causeways, catwalks and things like that. And so Pill basically wound up standing dead center in the middle of the room so that everyone could see. And they just spent a turn just riddling him with gunfire. And yeah, that took Pill down. He didn't go down twice. Did he go down twice? I think he eventually ended up going down a second time right at the end. Yeah, I did. Yeah. Another thing that slightly concerned me is before we played the session, we had dinner and just sort of hang around time. And both Shannon and Robin were talking about how they no longer liked their character. They had become sort of, well, Robin has gotten out of the Victorian headspace that she was in when she first created Chumley. She'd been reading a whole lot of books that were set, like, Pride and Prejudice type things. So she made Chumley based on that. And that was 2 years ago. And apparently she's not been reading those sorts of books since then. So she got out of that headspace. And Shannon,
she did a lot of prep ahead, even like she got a book of Victorian slang, and she spent a bunch of time specifically getting ready to play a Victorian character. And now it's been 2 years, and she still likes Chumley, but she's just not in the right headspace and doesn't have a lot of desire to get back. But we'll see.
And Yoon, Shannon was just talking about how Yoon's kind of boring, isn't she? I'm like, she's a doctor that dual wields rocket launchers. I think that's awesome, but so as this combat was getting hairy and Chumley and Yoon had both gone down like 3 times or whatever, I was wondering if they were going to go out in a blaze of glory so they could roll up some new characters. Turns out they didn't. We all sort of survived. I think Flint Daniels didn't go down, did he? Has everyone gone down?
I think everyone took at least one consequence, but yeah, I mean, there was a few interesting things. There was some places where there was cover. There was explosive cover where there was computer banks, and if you damage them enough, they would Star Trek electrical explode. And one of those was the navigational computers, which there was this unfortunate. There was a lot of like just rustiness with these rules are really not forgiving to rustiness, which is fine because then you give people easy combats, but this was a super hard combat. Anyway, we
blew the hell out of that computer.
Yeah, Yoon fired her single last rocket at this guy, and it turns out that there was a miscommunication and no one else was firing at him, and it didn't even hurt him. There was Panev. Panev was like the big muscle guy who they knew was infected. They saw a snake go into him, and she fired a rocket launcher at Panev, and the navigation computer took like all the rocket launcher damage, and in the end ended up exploding. And so now they've destroyed their navigational instruments.
To be fair, the dungeon master did put the toughest guy in the fight right behind the most fragile and most valuable piece of cover in the arena.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in the rules about like grappling people and dragging them out of zones or anything like that. So if he didn't want to move from that space, he couldn't be moved from that space. And so really, I think looking back at the layout of this board and all that, there was nothing we could have done to save that nav computer.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't intend it to be that way, but in retrospect, I think you're right. Like it was kind of doomed.
Yeah. Though even if we'd had like tased him or something like that, there's still nothing in the rules about moving people, dragging them around. So even if he's tased permanently, he's just gonna be there, tased over and over again.
Yeah. Now, I wasn't imagining necessarily that the computers were irretrievable. Like engineer can take a look at it and see, like, it's not like it's necessarily a smoking crater, but it's taken enough damage that it, Star Trek exploded. So, something, it may be repairable. We'll see. It did take a lot of damage, including some rocket launcher blasts. So, yeah. Chumley ended up jumping down to the lower deck and then jumping back up the other side in some successful cinematic style to directly engage with Paneve. And Paneve had this big gun, and he didn't talk. He just was like, is that kind of guy. And Chumley and him went toe to toe for a while until the tide started turning and enemies started dying. And when the infected enemies die, their mind snake comes out of their nose and then immediately starts trying to infect party members.
We came up with a potential countermeasure for mind snakes going up our noses.
Oh yes, that's right.
Yes. Yoon supplied us all with tampons, and we shoved them all up our noses. Chumley had no idea what tampons were. So yes, we were all shoving tampons up our noses for this fight.
Yeah, I mean the worms, the snakes will choose other places, but it will definitely give you some kind of advantage. But,
shove tampons in all the orifices.
Also, they're like the size of a USB cable, so it's not like a complete blockage. But yes, it will definitely hamper them for sure. Once Mind Snake started coming out, then Yoon got out her taser the only weapons she has now are a rocket launcher and taser. And
no middle ground at all.
And so she just started tasing, and there was a place, the place where Paneve and Chumley was like the place where the snakes just kept coming through, and so she just kept tasing that over and over and over again. So neither Paneve or Chumley could do anything. They were just stunned round after round after round as she tased them all again and again. Until eventually, I guess they got enough snakes had gone out that she stopped, and then they click a thing.
Let's get that. Yeah. Let's see, how did it go? Pill did use a plasma grenade. That was fun. Turns out it wasn't actually, well, it kind of, I threw a plasma grenade into a square with a guy, and plasma grenades go off like the next round. So there's a delay. And I think it wasn't Yoon, it was Empele, I think it was. Forgot about the plasma grenade. And so she opened fire on this guy and killed him just before the plasma grenade exploded. So it would have got him. I didn't need her to do that, but she went and stole. So
that reminds me of when Pill was down at the bottom and you ran out into the open and got shot by everyone. And then Pill was like, I'm walking back. And just then someone shot the computers there and they exploded and it blew up all over him as well.
Yeah. Pill was a bit of a bullet magnet there for a round or two. Pill got pretty badly riddled with bullets or lasers. And so I've decided his consequence is that his torso is riddled with holes now. And so he's somewhat not as good at doing things because he's having to use like half his tentacles to plug the holes to keep from leaking. So he's only got half his tentacles to operate his robot suit. The rest are plugging holes. But anyway, ultimately we prevailed.
I do appreciate that the controls require multiple tentacles. It's not just.
Well, I mean,
It makes sense, but it's little matter, right?
it's a complicated robot suit. Humans have all these little tentacles,
They're not tentacles. We have bones.
and you constantly are falling over and have to keep moving your legs around to keep from falling over.
You just catch yourself as you fall.
Yeah, that's what walking is. You fall forward and keep catching yourself over and over.
It's unsuccessfully falling.
It's a sort of like weird hopping thing you do. Anyway. So yes, yeah, that was basically the whole session was this combat. So when I say we won, that's kind of it.
Yeah, and that's also part of it is the combats are supposed to be quick, but this was not quick because it was just
we ran out of cards. The random things you're supposed to pull, there are no more cards.
And everyone like has at least a consequence, and Yoon has like a grave consequence. Her arm is like horribly injured, and I don't know how I'm gonna deal with that.
She's a doctor, so none of us are getting fixed because she's busted.
Two other things that happened. One of the mind snakes successfully got up the pant leg of Chumley, and no one saw what happened to it. He says he knocked it out, but no one.
Yeah,
it's possible Chumley got infected, but no one can really prove or disprove.
Yeah. After the combat, we demanded that Chumley take his pants off so we can inspect his trouser snake.
Of course he did.
Yep.
Do the players know if they're infected?
Presumably. John
from a
takes
game
us
mechanic
aside and gives us notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I myself received a note 2 years ago when all this first started, and I remember what it said. I'm not going to say, though, because that way it remains a mystery.
Excellent.
But anyway, yeah. Also, when we shot Peneve, the big muscle guy, and finally took him down, John was very emphatic that no mind snake came out of him.
It's funny that it's emphatic because I actually wanted to just like gloss over and hope no one would notice, but everyone was like, "Doesn't the mind snake come out of him?" And I was like, "No." But
we actually, it's funny, we totally glommed onto that fact, but then we ignored the implications. I assumed that just meant that Peneve was on their side anyway. He's just decided to be on their side or something. But no, actually what that meant is that he hadn't actually been killed. And so then he did that standard thing where you think the fight's over and then the big bad jumps up behind you and grabs you like that because you thought he was dead, but nope, turns out he's not dead.
Yeah, and so we entered like a brawl, which is against Peneve is really hard. He's like a really tough brawler guy, and it was going to be like this sort of like, everyone versus Thanos fight where it's just like you're all trying to punch him one by one. But then someone was like, "Wait, I have a taser, and I don't care about tasing my party member." So they just and I mean, and I was like, "Yeah, okay." It's sort of like the Indiana Jones shoot the guy thing. Yep, they just tased him, and they just like as they
riddled him with gunfire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I know right at the beginning of the session, John made very clear to like give us a little test combat and remind us of the rules for brawling, because I'm sure he had this planned out ahead of time that there was going to be this set piece at the end of the fight, and that's why he reminded us of the rules for brawling.
Yeah, well, and I wanted to have a normal brawl too, so that like this brawl, it was clear this is like a big super hard fight.
Yeah,
but
instead we just tased him and then shot him a bunch.
Because I commented that like if just the way the rules work, I was like if a guy has like three white cubes on him, that's like the guy that Indiana Jones has to kill with the propeller, because like you just can't fight him, right? And of course Peneve had 3 cubes on him, but they just tased him.
Yep. So yeah, things didn't work out as planned at pretty much every stage of the combat, but we survived. However, the ship is still moving. It's still charging full steam ahead at whatever course it was on before, and the nav computer is destroyed. So, problem. The ship is headed for shore. I think they were just going to try and like beach it or something like that, because they didn't care. They just wanted the ship out of the way, and so we need to stop it from hitting shore, and then we need to take it to the mother baobab, so we can give it the image of the insanity machine.